Welcome back. We're going to talk about reels and how to know if you're a left-hand retriever or a right-hand retriever. I would say 30% of the time when somebody calls the shop and says, we want a reel, set it up, and you say, are you a left-hand or right-hand retrieve? They will always, not always, 30% of the time, but they will say the wrong thing. If you cast with your right hand in the trout world, this is not about the other steelhead or saltwater. In a trout world, if you cast with your right hand, you generally reel with your left hand. So you'll want a left hand retrieve. If you're a lefty and you cast your left hand, you will reel with your right hand. Now, you go back in time, way back to almost, into the 70s. And what you'll find is that all reels like this 1900 something, 1920 Hardy, all reels came right hand retrieve. And I mean all of them. Even, I believe, even when Ross first came out with their reels, the original Ross reel, I'm pretty certain they were still right hand retrieves, and you had to swap them out. So, and I don't know why. It's a European thing, it was just everyone did it. And then you fast forward just a few years, like maybe late 70s sometime, all of a sudden people realized that most trout people were going to reel with their left hand, and they started switching them. So it's usually an easy conversion, but there's a reason in the bigger, when you start fishing steelhead. I mean, the first time I did this back in a long time ago, 30 years ago or so, and I first went up to British Columbia and I started steelheading up there. All of the steelhead people would cast with their right and reel with their right. And I didn't really understand it until I went out my first day out, and that was back in the single hand days. There wasn't the spay thing going back then. That was into the 90s. But single hand, lots of casts. Frequently you're this deep in water. You're running a T2 300 sinking line. You got to keep your arms up in the air so you're not wet. And you got to bring the retrieve, you let the swing come out, you bring your line in so you can do a roll cast, pick it up, 2 or 3 casts, and boom, out goes your line, right? It's a lot of work, especially if you're above your waist and you're holding your arms up. So it's a lot of work. So long story short, I go out, fish about 8 hours, get my first steelhead on, it's a big one, and I fight it with my left hand. I have the rod in my right hand, I'm reeling with my left, and I'm done, and my hand is so cramped from casting all day and fighting that fish. I was like, well, now I understand why they do it. I went back to the camp and I switched all my reels around. Same thing with saltwater to a lesser extent. You're not casting as much, but your power hand is fighting the fish. And if you do it on your casting hand, it wears it out a lot faster. Now, Trout World, not a big deal. I would say at this point, everybody that casts right reels left. For the most part, I mean, almost everybody. I don't see any advantage of doing one way or the other. It's just, but if you're calling in or you wonder what it is, if you cast with your right and you reel with your left, you are a left hand retrieve. If you cast with your left and reel with your right, you are a right hand retrieve. So it's the hand that you reel with is your retrieve. So if you're wondering which hand you reel with, if you're wondering, are you a left or right, is your reel a left or right? Generally speaking, you're going to have a different audible. And if you listen to this, I love this Hardy's noise. And I think noise is a big thing for reels. I just like the way they sound. If you listen, that's one sound, different sound, right? It's usually a deeper sound on the line going out. If you're curious, just tighten the drag down. The reeling part will never change. This part gets a lot harder. That'll tell you if it's left or right. So if you want it on the left where you're going to cast with your right hand, reel, it'll be smooth. And then if you go the other way, tighten the drag a little bit, it'll tell you that it's a left hand retrieve. If you're going to switch these, it's almost, this is an easy one to see on this Lamson. Almost all reels nowadays have a one-way bearing inside here. So here's the bearing. You just flip it from one side to the other, it reverses the reel. It's that simple. Just a little side note, you cannot do that on the river without taking your entire line off and spooling it back on if you're going to swap them. You can't just switch it because now your reel's going one way and your line's coming off the other. But that's all there is to it. Hope you like it. Hope that helps you out.